Hello, everyone. Welcome to Or This. This is my Monday morning quarterbacking of the scriptures and sermon for the previous Sunday, and this video is for Sunday, October 19th. The scriptures assigned for the day are Genesis 32, verses 22 through 31, Psalm 121, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 14 through chapter 4, verse 5, and Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. I preached on the Luke passage yesterday, although interestingly, when I looked back on sermons that I've preached on these texts over the past 9 years, it comes up every 3 years. So 3 previous sermons that I preached on these texts, I actually preached on the first reading from Genesis. So preaching on Luke this time around was different, but yet I'm going to, in this video, talk about the Genesis text. So, with that in mind, let's talk about what this story is. And it is a story of Jacob wrestling with God, or a messenger from God. And it's important, the whole, you have to, in order to really understand what's going on here, you pretty much have to understand who Jacob is and what his story is. Jacob has an older brother, Esau, and basically at 2 different times Jacob was a trickster. The first time he tricked his brother, he didn't trick his Esau the first time. It was kind of just taking advantage of the situation. But Esau was really hungry, and Jacob had just made a really nice stew. And so since Esau was so hungry, Jacob offered to give him the stew in exchange for his birthright as the eldest son. So I guess you could kind of call that a bit of a trick. Esau kind of knew what he was getting into, but at the same time, he was being taken advantage of at a time when he was famished, hungry, maybe even hangry. As we all know, how hard it can be sometimes to think straight when your sugar's low and you're really, really hungry. So that was the first problem, the first situation between Jacob and Esau. But the second one was when their father Isaac was getting older, and he was not able to see very well, and he wanted to give his final blessing to his eldest son. But when Jacob overheard that, he decided to try to trick his father into giving that blessing to him. And so he dressed, because Esau was known for being a little bit hairier than him, so he put on some animal skins to make it appear like he was hairy, and to take some stew to his father. And his father, not being able to see very well, he felt his son and assumed it was Esau, and he gave the brother to Jacob instead. After that episode, Esau got so mad at his brother that he said he wanted to kill him. So Jacob ends up fleeing from that land and going to the land of his mother's family. There he ends up with his wives and starting his family there. Although he does end up being on the other end of some trickiness from his uncle Laban. So he ends up being tricked by Laban, and then so he gets back at Laban by tricking Laban, so that Jacob ends up with a large herd of animals, sheep, I believe it was, which in his day would be good for make him wealthy and make him prosperous. And so Laban gets angry at him too, and so this is his journey back to his brother. And he, at the beginning, sends his wives, his maids, his 11 children ahead of him, and all his stuff ahead of him, and he's alone on this he's alone for the night. And during the night, he wrestles with this person. Interestingly enough, he asks the person's name, but the person won't give him a name. But while they're wrestling, he also asks the person to bless him. And he does end up with a blessing. This story has been used by me. I mean, I've talked about this story a little bit as a metaphor for our life of faith, and how sometimes in our lives, as we face uncertainty, or as we wrestle with some of the choices we've made in the past that haven't been all that great, or when we wrestle with trying to figure out where God is in our lives, that gives us kind of like permission that wrestling is actually a part of that life of faith. Because here Jacob is wrestling, and you know that it's not just a physical thing, but it's kind of also something he's wrestling with, what he's going to face when he finally faces Esau for the first time in many, many years. And where God is in all of this. Is God with him? Is his brother going to be mad? What's going to happen? And so this night before he sees his brother, he is wrestling. And as I said before, it gives and the name. So when he's wrestling and he asks for a blessing, the messenger, or the being with whom he wrestles, first asks him his name. When he says it's Jacob, the man says, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." The name Israel is a name that means he wrestles with God. So, names have meaning in the Bible, and that helps us, again, because it helps us to think about that sometimes part of our life of faith is we're not going to know everything and have everything figured out all the time, and life isn't going to just be so nice and smooth because we're people of faith. We may actually experience times when we feel like we are wrestling with ourselves, wrestling with our faith in God, wrestling with God even. But it's, like I said before, it's an interesting piece of this story that even though the messenger isn't willing to say his name, he's willing to bless Jacob. And I think that maybe is what we seek, what we look for in our wrestling. Once again, asking for God's blessing, and saying, not necessarily a blessing that says all of life is going to all of a sudden be hunky-dory from here, or easy from this point, but blessing in a way that says that God be with us, and God lead and guide us to know and to see where you are in our lives, and to allow something to come out of our lives, or out of certain situations that we may be wrestling with, that something may come out of it that might be a blessing to us and to others, with whom we have relationship. So in my previous sermons, I have said, this is the moment you've all been waiting for. If you are a wrestling fan, here is a sermon on wrestling. So here's this video about wrestling. But the wrestling that we do in our faith and in our lives is nothing like the WWF stuff. Sometimes it's really down, nitty gritty, like really, really striving and struggling and pushing and pulling and trying to understand. But in the end, the most important thing for us to understand is God is with us there. And God will bless as we wrestle. God will bless us with God's presence, and will bless us going forward so that relationships can be restored or reconciled, so that something can come out of difficult situations, so that there is some purpose or some good that could come at some point for us or for those who are involved in our lives or in whatever situation we're wrestling with. So I wonder if you've ever felt like you were wrestling with life or with your faith or with God. Or I wonder if you have any comments on that idea. Does that sound like something that's actually real, really a part of faith? Or I wonder if you have any questions or comments on the sermon from yesterday. Any and all of that, you are welcome to share in the comments on this video. And thank you so much for watching. God bless.